Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Fierce Honest Hearts. I'm Heidi. The other woman is Fereshta, and we have Daniel Singer today as our guest. And yeah, we're excited to have another guy on. So welcome, Daniel. Thank you for agreeing to be here. It was really sweet for me to connect with you through your IG post. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So we typically, as we do, we will start with a check-in, and I can begin just to kind of roll that off. My check-in is that I'm very affected by the weather, by the temperature, by the humidity. I'm in Philadelphia, and last week we had some really rough days where it was warm and the humidity was high, and for the last 3.5, 4 days, it's been more comfortable. So I just noticed my mood is different. I feel different. I feel like I have more energy. I'm just more pleasant to myself and to be around, and appreciating even, and I talk about this a lot, but the ability to laugh at myself and just to, not take myself so seriously. So that's part of my check-in. And what else is alive? So I have how shall I say this? In respect to myself, I have changed the way that I am in relationship with a certain person in my life. That's just kind of out there. And what I've noticed is that I have more energy for myself, and because I was putting a lot into the relationship and there was very little, if any, coming back. And I'm like, yeah, you're putting a lot of effort in, Heidi. It's not working. So I changed that up pretty quickly, and I've changed that, and I'm aware of my boundaries around it. And I'm celebrating myself for making that change pretty quickly, because in the past, it takes sometimes months for me to figure something out. And I'm like, nope, we don't need to do that. So that's my check-in. That's where I am. Daniel, would you like to go next, or Fereshta? I don't know if you're ready or not, but we're welcome.
Yeah, sure. I'll go next. And thanks for sharing that, Heidi. It sounds to me like perhaps the time to process and reconcile is getting shorter for you. Would you say that sounds true?
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'm coming in. I'm good. I'm actually at my full-time job right now, and I'm just really grateful that I have a creative director that I work with who his spouse is actually a coach. And so I have like a lot of freedom and flexibility to, literally leave my desk. I was in the middle of doing some design projects, come in here, have this great conversation. This is, where we're really high on my values. And so it's great to be here and not have to be stressing about it, after doing a design career of 20 plus years. Like, this is the job that I feel like is that transitory job that's going to allow me to launch into what I really, I've had my sights set on the last couple of years as I started a hero's journey. So I'm feeling very grateful. I'm also feeling very like with my own partnership, like a lot has happened. My partner and I have had lots of conflict this last year. And just recently we have worked through a lot of that with a really skilled couples coach. And our dynamic has just shifted in a way where we're able to be really honest with each other and honest with ourselves, and just taking one day at a time and really enjoying the process. We're also both in a cohort together, taking a couples coaches training for the next 9 months. And so it's an interesting dynamic to be learning about stuff. And for me, it's like I'm internalizing this stuff like, oh shit, I do that too. And then I'm realizing, oh, my partner's right here. But it's cool because I get to own up, not only for myself, but like my partner gets to hear it as well. So.
Damn, that is just some warriorship. I'm like feeling that in my body, having gone through couples coaching, but not with my partner in the room. And that was already edgy because I was downloading like, oh, things I do that I am going to be telling other people not to do, right? That's the conundrum that I shared with you, Daniel. That was like, that course made me a better partner, because to be immersed in that for 9 months and not get better would have, like, there's no way that was possible. And I guess that's a good place to check in. I love hearing that because I just, knowing you, of course, you would go right into the fire like that. Of course, you would be willing to do that kind of warriorship. So not surprised, but super impressed. Because that's, I just like, it's edgy, right, Heidi? Like, do you feel that? Yeah, it's super edgy. Yeah. I was having a really sweet moment with my partner today because he's had events Saturday, Sunday, I think Tuesday, and years ago, like if we had blipped out of our normal rituals, like coffee, lunch, our evenings, my anxious attachment style would have been like feeling deprioritized, you know, my own childhood stuff would have come up. And none of that's been happening, even though we've seen a lot less of each other over the last 4.5 days. And I just, in a very quiet way, kind of said, like, I'm feeling some quiet celebration here because I feel so secure that I'm not like, that tripwire isn't going off, right? Which speaks to the work we've done and the tumultuous years of challenge that we've been through. And it was really sweet to hear him say, yeah, it helps me feel less anxious knowing I have all these events stacked, that it's not going to lead to conflict. And that, it's a help me, help you, help me, help you kind of cycle here of keeping each other feeling safe and secure. So that was really cool. And then I had a really interesting experience earlier this week where I tried to share feedback with a couple of people. And I put this in a reel because I was so fired up about like, this is fucked up and that it's hurtful. And just watching 3 people in real time in front of me do different strategies, right? I call them like the collapse, defend, dismiss strategies. And there's a part of me that can intellectually understand and have compassion for each person doing their thing. And there was a younger part of me that felt really hurt not to be seen and heard, And more than that, because that's like one layer, it was this feeling of like me being made wrong for having feelings about something, right? That place, it's a really slippery slope where I left there going, I don't feel seen and heard, but that's okay because I can see and hear myself. I got that part. But there was this feeling of like, what's wrong with this chick for having these feelings? So I had to really work with that part of me that was, felt a familiar tinge of sadness around being more sensitive and sensitive in all the right ways. And then having people look at you like you've grown a third head, that stuck with me the whole day, that piece. Like, ooh, there's a little tender, wounded place there that I need to just tend to. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, really feeling that and certainly identifying with it, being an HSP myself and having my own emotions come up unexpectedly sometimes. And I'm like, oh my God, what's going on here? And feeling as if I want to be able to control it. And then I'm like, no, it's simply okay to be who you are, Heidi, right? Like, it's okay to be, we're human. We have feelings and it's okay to to express. It's okay to not know where they come from. It's okay when they happen spontaneously. It's all of it's okay. And so yeah. And for anyone else who experiences that, my hope is that when that happens, that you're in a safe space for people to hold you, to hold your feelings, to hold all of it. And I'm sorry to hear that that wasn't the situation for you. I really mean that.
You.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think I came back to myself pretty quickly, which was like, that was really a boundary violation for me. I don't feel things for no reason. Yeah. Right. So the anger and the confusion that was rising was valid.
Mhm.
And there are just some people who haven't yet learned how to validate people's feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And so I came back pretty quickly, but I was like, oh, Daniel, you and I swim in these waters where everyone's learning to be that way.
Right.
So when I end up out of those waters, I'm a little more shocked than I used to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it's like like I'm shook because I'm remembering there's more work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want, I think I'm going to add that it's a gift. It's a gift when someone can hold that for you, right? And I didn't grow up experiencing that gift. And so as I've gotten older, and I have some really solid relationships, friendships that are healthy, that are very equal, that are very balanced and deep. I've attained that. Like, that's come with those relationships, and I'm grateful doesn't even begin to express what I want to express about it, but really it is a game changer. It has literally changed my life in a certain, and I know that might sound dramatic to some people, but when those of us who grew up in a situation, in a family or whatever, where we didn't experience that, and we were told to not express, or we were told that we're getting too loud, or we're getting too excited, we're not supposed to cry, whatever the situation is, when the tables are turned and it's flipped on its head, and that's invited to gain, it really is life-changing. Yeah.
Daniel, wondering for you, as Heidi shares this, I'm just imagining some parallels maybe in your own life. Curious what it's like for you, like, let's say before relational skills, after relational skills and needs.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that came to mind is, like, we've created this community of like-minded people, right? Who have values, high values of communication and, tenderness and belonging. And so just that contrast of when, and I think for me, I'll make the assumption that if somebody's doing this kind of work, or they're in this space, that, they're kind of on par with, so you're communicating and somebody lashes out or doesn't receive feedback, it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. Like, and then I start to get a little judgy, right? Like, wait, we have like the same training, we read the same books, like, wait, are we on the same team here? And so, but I think, just there's always work to do, right? That's been a stumbling block for me, even just trying to put myself out as a coach, because I feel like there has to be this certain level of decorum or education, or, enough data that shows that I can live at a certain level of expectation, right? And have very little faults. And I'm realizing, like, if I wait for that, like, I'm never, I'll die before I, officially launch a coaching practice. So, one of the things that came up, Heidi, when you were talking, for me was just, I instantly went to, a female bodied individual's experience, right? About being too much or, being too loud or whatever. It's like, as a white man in America, like that's never been said to me. Right. I mean, I can think about maybe as an annoying 3 or 4-year-old, when my dad telling me that I'm too noisy or whatever, but that's a whole different context, for me, than it probably does for you both.
Thanks for naming that, Daniel. I appreciate your caring consideration there. And I'm holding like for the male experience too. You must have gotten messaging that still fell under too much in the male conditioning. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm trying to process this as I'm receiving this right now, and I'm going like, okay, where, like, what's like, what are the greatest hits examples of this? And I mean, this is something that I've been dealing with a lot since, I left the Mormon church, although it's been almost a decade. There's still remnants of all of that conditioning, right? Especially the patriarchal conditioning there of, it was ingrained in me for 40 years that I was, as a priesthood holder, I was the most important person in a room. Didn't matter what the genders were. That at 12 years old, when I received the priesthood, I had more power than, the 95-year-old widow sitting in a pew on the front row. And that's I can be trite and say, like, I never wanted that power, that sucks. But as, a mature adult who's now trying to slough off this conditioning, it's really challenging. I'm still thinking about your question about, what would have been too much for me. I feel like there's not a lot of spaces. I was just listening to Jason Gaddis just did a podcast. I can't remember her name, but she's a report. She was a journalist, or she is, and her whole premise is talking about the workplace and the gender biases that are happening. 2% of VC money goes to female-led companies, right? I mean, just atrocious data points that are truth. And I'm, I got to take advantage of that for 20 plus years. I got to be, just by default, right, the guy in the room who it was just implied that I had the right answers or that I had the solutions. And a lot of companies I worked for had barely any female leadership at all.
Yeah, I kind of see you aware of, like, privilege is a tricky word, but like aware of where you maybe had more power in the dynamics. Like you're actually noticing that now.
Yeah.
And I'm also, oh,
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was just more curious about, like, little boys, right? Like the don't cries and don't be emotional and don't be sensitive, or the don't be's that are different for each of us, depending on our parents' values, I think.
Okay.
But I'm curious there too, but please finish
Yeah.
what you're saying.
No, that lands for me. I think it was just the way you phrase it, the don't, instead of the you are too much. Yeah. I mean, that is one thing that I am like, if I could go to my grave with any sort of message to the world, it's, we have to eradicate this whole boy code thing, that I got, that I'm still, there's still remnants of that, right, that are lingering, even after I have lived for several decades of being a sensitive man, of being somebody who's emotionally aware. It still creeps in that, like, oh gosh, who's looking at me right now as I'm tearing up, right? Or my more, for lack of better words, more masculine friends, and I think what I mean there is just stereotypically masculine friends. Can they see vulnerable Daniel who's this version of me, this is the authentic version of me, without feeling like I still have to hide parts of me, right? And seek that validation of like, hey, I'm still a man, it's tricky.
Daniel, I'm curious, just going back a little bit, you had said that you grew up in the Mormon church and that at the age of 12, 13-ish, did you use the term priesthood? Priest?
Yeah, priesthood. The church ordains a 12-year-old boy to
Okay.
called the Aaronic priesthood.
Okay. So I'm curious about two things. I'm curious what that means, like what that entails. And also, with that amount of power, not that you could have thought about that at that age, I don't know. But now as a 50-ish year old man, how do you see how that affected you? Like how that flipped your life? Like what did that do to you, or how did it affect you? As a young child, like I can't even, I don't know. It's anyway, I'm not going to put my stuff on it, but I'm really curious.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So there's ties to like, Old Testament, biblical stuff. The Aaron, that's where Aaronic comes from. And then there's the Melchizedek priesthood. That's the higher. So when you're 18, you actually receive a even higher level of priesthood. The women in the church never receive any of this. And so there's the narrative of, well, women are so glorified, they don't need this, right? So there's now an implied message that they're already inferior, and so they have to have this God-ordained power, right, to level the playing field between the sexes. But to answer your second part of your question, what really sucks about it is like you're 12 years old. I mean, you look at the psychological development of a 12-year-old, which is like, who am I? Where do I fit? And you're wielding this power that like the church basically runs on, right? And I just wanted to be a boy who wanted to skateboard down the street, not necessarily have this onus upon me, to, I don't know, take care of things that were way beyond my years of maturity. Yeah. But what's really tricky about it is like there's this subtle messaging that like you are the dominant gender. You're a man, we don't talk about Heavenly Mother in the Mormon church. It's always Heavenly Father. And so it's just straight up patriarchy, right? We believe that there's a Heavenly Mother presence, we used to believe, but it's never talked about. And so it's really just the men are really important here. And so when I got married, right, I remember telling my wife once, in some argument about something that like, well, I'm the priesthood holder. And so what I say goes. And this is very typical, this sort of attitude and even verbal statements like that. Mm-hmm. That's like run of the mill because, since I was 12, I got this conditioning over and over and over. Yeah. I was the head of the household. And so then, you start talking about like just relational dynamics in a house, about like, lost for words right now, the emotional labor of a family. It just splits the gendered stereotypes right down the middle, right? Right. I'm not a nurturer, but I have this power and I get to make the decisions. I get to, go buy a new car. I don't even have to consult you. Like these are typical experiences that I have had from friends or family members, that type of dynamic.
I'm so fascinated.
I know, I want to swear right now. It's because like
Yeah.
I'm thinking of that, like not only, am I on a hero journey to like undo just straight up patriarchy just from our world's dynamic, I also have this church piece,
Yes.
right? That was a huge part of my identity for 40 years,
Mhm.
whose script, I conscripted so much of my life to the church.
Mhm. Mhm.
When you start talking about individuating, my 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 yeah, my compass was just totally out of whack because so much of the narrative I was living by was given to me by the church, with an obedience part and a heavenly, uh, what's the word? Like, there's just all of this attached to it, like eternal glory and all this, right? If you don't obey, then you're not going to heaven. You're not going to be a god. So it's a
Oh,
really big
I'm feeling
burden.
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in real quick? When you were talking about the 12-year-old, right? And all this power given to a 12-year-old. I was I was more in touch with like when there's a parentified child in a family, right? That is all of a sudden given all this false empowerment to then it's like, oh my gosh, if my parents think I should be able to solve their marital problems, then I guess I should, right?
Mm.
There starts to become this narrative that like a parentified child would create. What is I guess, what are you sloughing off from that time period right now?
Yeah. Um, uh, the first thing that comes to mind is just not being the most important person in a room, especially in a room where, there's women. I went through a big feminist awakening. One of the greatest gifts that my ex-wife gave to me, not knowing, was she went through a feminist awakening, and which is the worst thing that can happen to an active male member of the church, right? Oh shit, my wife's like starting to have an awakening here, and what's this going to do to our eternal family? What's this going to do to our eternal bond, right? Marriage. And but yet that Gemini in me, that loves data, that loves learning new things, started to, pique my interest when my wife would bring things to me. Hey, do you know about this? Do you know about, this that happened in old church history? And I'm like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And then I'm like, I really want to hear it though. So yeah, so that's a big part of it is just learning how not to be important, but also, for me, it's being an advocate, and an ally for, I have two daughters, and I don't want them to have to go through what so many women have had to go through, where, it's one thing to like, go to a workplace and you got, typical, men who have just been raised in patriarchy, but like to have your own dad also create that, that really like distinct, that distinct male, female, just, yeah, to instill that patriarchy in a home setting. I can't, I can't imagine. And my daughters, they're great. They're out of it. They actually didn't have to be. We left the church when they were, young teenagers. And so I'm grateful that their experience is not, what I grew up in. So there's some cycle breaking in there as well. But other things that I would consider trying to undo is just, becoming, yeah, for me, just like working through really what masculinity means for me, regardless of what, the conditioning was, not only the boy code, but then, the Mormon, context placed on top of that, that I was all powerful. Um, Turning all that inside to find out who really I am, on a personal level has been like a big journey for me. Still in it, right? I'll be in it for a long time.
I imagine it to be our life's work, right? So Right, Heidi, I saw your eyes get big.
It is, and it is, and beyond, right?
Mhm.
And after, and in the afterlife. Um, this is so fascinating to me. So, because I really don't know, I know very little about the Mormon Church. And so it's really fascinating to hear from someone who was in it for as long as you were. And then, so my next question, if you want to share, if you don't, that's okay. I'm really curious to know, what was the tipping point? What was the thing that kind of put you over the edge and you were like, we're leaving the church? So was your what? And before you answer that, was your wife also of the Mormon? And when was she also Mormon?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we actually met as missionaries in Belgium, actually.
Okay.
We were, and this is why I live in Utah, because we co-parent, my youngest daughter with a disability here. So yeah, we met on our mission, which is actually totally taboo. So actually looking back, I go, there's a little bit of a renegade in me deep down, right? Like, you don't go on a mission to meet your future spouse. You go on your mission to, preach the gospel, right?
Right.
And to get converts. But we met and served in the same town for several months. And it was really hard in Europe because Catholicism has such a stronghold there that didn't have a lot of conversions, in the 2 years that I was out there. But yeah, my wife and I got married like 6 weeks after she got home. We didn't even date. And so there's also this pressure, from the church that when you get home from your mission, you marry really young. Don't wait, you have this, this divine call to multiply, replenish. That's why Mormons have typically, larger families. But yeah, when she started going through that feminist awakening, which was about 2007, again, I didn't want to hear anything about it, right? She stopped attending church. She took our oldest child, my daughter, out of the church. And then I just, my relationship with my daughter was really strained. I slut shamed her. Because this is also the conditioning, right? Well, yeah, you're getting groped at school, but look at the way you're dressing, right? Not putting any onus whatsoever on the boys or the men, right? And I got my wife sent me a podcast of this sex therapist who's Mormon and was talking about the relational dynamics mostly between father and daughter. And I was donating plasma at the time, financial times were hard. And I remember, one of the things I've always been about is receiving feedback, as hard as it is to hear, but also like, okay, I'm curious, I'm going to listen to this. So I'm donating plasma one day at the plasma bank and I'm listening to this podcast and I'm just having these oh shit moments. What have I done with my daughter and our relationship? And that was kind of a turning point for me. And I just went down a rabbit hole and I started, I think subconsciously at that point, just starting to kind of put dirt back in the hole that I had been digging for decades so that I could eventually climb out. But yeah, it was my ex-wife who, led us through that. I stayed for another probably year and attended with my youngest daughter with the disability because, her condition, she's very social. And so this was something that she didn't really understand, how you leave, a religion that your family's been a part of for so long. But she's out now as well. And, all my kids are out. But yeah, it was tricky. I don't know. Was there another part of your question? I'm trying to remember.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't
The tipping
remember.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. It was about the tipping point. So when someone leaves a church like the Mormon church, how is there like an unconditional, like, is there a process that you're supported with so that you can unlearn these things? Because, and this has always been my perspective on religion, and I grew up in a pretty religious home. And it wasn't until years later. But anyway, but my perspective is that many religions feel kind of cult-like.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious, like when one leaves the Mormon church, are there people that have been in the church and unconditioned and all that support those who are leaving in that way, so that they can, because I can only imagine how challenging it would be. Like, yes, you've made the decision, you've made the choice to leave, and then there's still so much that you're holding, that 40 years is a long time. Yeah. You know what I'm asking, yes?
Yes, I do. Let me give you a little bit of context, what it's like here to live in the headquarters of the Mormon Church.
Oh, that's right. You're right there. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm in Utah County, and Utah County is, I think it's somewhere around like 92% Mormon. And one of the terms we use in Mormonism is a ward, and that would be like a parish.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
That's our geographical. So in my neighborhood, our ward of 300 plus members was just 3 streets. So we're literally talking like on a street of 10 homes, 8 of those are active attending Mormons
Right.
that are going to church. So now imagine the singers have now left the church, just stopped showing up one Sunday, right? I mean, for us, it was a little bit more gradual because my ex stopped attending, and then you get the conversations in the hallways at church, like, oh, how's your wife? And then it's more coming from a place of like, oh, that's so sad that, your wife's having faith struggles, right? But then also this pressure of like, well, you're the priesthood holder. How are you letting this happen, right? How are you letting this woman in your home who, remember, I've been conditioned my entire life that I'm the head of the household, that there's this implied, very misogynistic, right, dynamic. And I'm like, and I wasn't like that. Like I said, I never wanted this power, right? This was the community that I knew. It was the water I was swimming in for so long. And so I was like, well, Tiffany has say her name. She has her own experience. And, if she wants to not attend church, that's her decision. So even that is now met with like, oh, Daniel doesn't have any control of his wife. Imagine so I've stopped going to church now. The neighbors that used to walk down the street and we'd sit and talk as I'm, trimming the bushes or mowing the lawn, and we stop and chat. There's now no longer conversations like this happening. We become the pariah of the neighborhood, right? And the irony of that was like, we were never talking about church anyway. We were talking where we were going on summer vacations, how the was turning, how our kids were doing in school. And that just literally stops, like immediately abbreviated. So there is no path out. You are on your own. You are conditioned, as I was for so many decades, that, oh, the singers just aren't faithful anymore. They're probably doing something that's sinful, and it could be anything like I'm having an affair, or maybe I'm now drinking alcohol, or I'm, addicted to pornography, a number of things that people would just create a story about. That's why you've lost the faith, and so you're no longer attending church because, or the devil's got a grasp on your soul. I mean, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if you're attending,
oh, everything's great.
Then everything's great. And so nobody even looks behind closed, or even considers looking or assuming behind closed doors, right?
Absolutely. It's the adage that we say is like, if everybody's sins could smell like cigarette smoke, right?
Yeah.
The chapel, it would be a whole different dynamic, right?
Wow.
Damn. Well, I have a question just in line with knowing your work as a coach, right? Knowing what you are endeavoring towards.
Yeah.
Having had this history, right? Because I've heard easily at least a dozen people in the last year talk about having wished they had support around religious trauma.
Mm,
right? Still relational trauma in some regards.
yeah.
How does your redefining masculinity, that piece of your work, and you stepping away and stepping into your truth, how are those two things part of what you might teach others or support others with? Or are they? Like, would you want to step into supporting people stepping away from church?
Away from a church. Yeah, I mean, I have it on my website as one of the areas of focus. I candidly, I haven't had, a client yet that's approached me about that. But it's really interesting. I've noticed that, as I've begun to speak my truth, I mean, even like, yeah, Fereshta knows this, I play pickleball a lot. And so there's a lot of social conversations happening between games. And I've just started telling my truth, and again, I live in a community where there's tons of active Mormons, right? Especially a lot of my pickleball friends. But as I kind of not, put the strategy away of trying to maintain a connection by just placating, like having that common thing, I just go like, yeah, I left the church. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't want this or that. As hard as that is for them to receive, I'm over here, and it's good practice for me too, right? As somebody who's very anxiously attached and people pleasing and eggshell walking for most of my life. But as I start to tell that truth, it allows them to come into the conversation a little bit, like get a little bit closer and a little more intimate, and into the conversation of like, oh, I've kind of struggled about that as well. I mean, even the job I'm at right now, my creative director, who's him and his wife and family just left about a year ago. I've been here 2 years. I came in as the person who I am out of the church. And our first conversations, he's like, yeah, I'm so, we still go. And, our little boy, it's like, it's a good communal thing. And I just bluntly told him, I'm like, Geen, you know exactly the conditioning that you and I both got. We're both 50 years old. Do you really want your son to deal with this shit? And again, like, they're hard conversations to have, but they're truthful conversations. And I feel like there's a lot of healing that happens when you can just own it and let. Heidi, to get back to your comment you said before, it is a cult. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And it's hard to get out of a cult. Fereshta, back to what you had said. Yeah, I've been kind of working on how that would look, because me, I'm a tender man. And so, I don't want to offend anybody, but at the same time, I'm trying to find that balance of like, what is my truth? What is enough truth that might someone to, through activation, like be challenged a little bit to like, because I know the conditioning. I know that there are so many people who are tolerating what's happening in the church right now, with the homophobia, with the billions of dollars that the SEC found that they've been hiding in shell companies, and this is supposed to be a church, right? So just finding that balance of like not really pissing people off, but having my own back and helping other people if they're really wanting out, like, let me help you. I don't know.
Yeah, what I sense from both, redefining masculinity, which is kind of place I think of you, and then stepping away from something that's not your truth, they both fall in line with moving from strategic north, right, to your true
Totally.
north. And I also wonder, because we haven't really stepped into this, and I'm noticing the time is, how do these things, um, I don't know how to frame this. How does this make you aware in partnership in a different way now?
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's two things that come to mind. The first one is just my relationship with my ex. We've been divorced 5 years now, and we're finally at a place where like our communication is amicable. And things have totally shifted, even just like in the last like 5 weeks. As I said before, we co-parent a daughter with a disability, right? And so that creates a little bit of a different dynamic than had she been neurotypical, right? There wouldn't have to be as much contact. but one of the things that I've been really thinking of just it's hard not to, when you're in a couples coaches training for 9 months, to not kind of backfill experiences with like, oh damn, had I known this, right? Had this set of skills, had I known how to communicate, had I known how to validate someone's experience. I've even just recently, there was an incident in our marriage, that happened over 15 years ago that I'm like, it came to the surface in a conversation with my current partner. And I'm like, damn, I think I need to go back and write my ex an email, that just to make sure that the apology was really there. Cause I think in my mind, it was like, yeah, no, we're good, and I think I've just let that be the resolution, and I'm realizing like it's still bound up a little bit in my heart. And so so there's that part. And then in my current partnership, my partner has a woman's experience, and she also grew up in the church. And so she has a very narcissistic ex-husband who was the controlling type, who was the most important point in the room, and wanted that power, right? Whether it was in the bedroom, whether it was in the kitchen, whether it was anything having to do, he was the end all be all, right? And so, being in a relationship with a partner who's had that experience, but then I'm also sloughing off all of that I was never really into, but there was a lot that was still, ingrained in me. I think about that a lot. I think what I used to take for granted in my marriage of just like, well, I'm not an asshole. I'm not beating you, but like, what are those microaggressions that I might be doing in my current relationship? And as I learn more about, the female experience and, still trying to work through boy code bullshit, there's still a lot to work through and own, and acknowledge that like, I haven't arrived yet. Not that I think I'm ever going to arrive, but how can I inflict less and less harm the older I get?
Thank you for all of that. Inflicting less harm, just humanity, right? In general, how can we do less of that? Wow, I'm just noticing the time, and
I went fast in it.
it did. It really flew by. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to share before we pivot, or I'm open to that if there's.
The other thing, with Fereshta asking me about like kind of the helping people transition out of the church, I think my big thing that I feel called to lately is men's work. And that was always something, when I started training as a relationship coach, that I thought would be the thing. And maybe it's just because it's a pet project for my own men's work, but I'm just, the more I read, the more memes that I read, podcasts I listen to, how many women are out there with, in heteronormative relationships with men who are abusive in a myriad of ways, and it might just be emotionally abusive, but like that has such a huge impact. And so I facilitated men's groups this last summer for 16 weeks, and it was just really eye-opening to see how many men that were actually had the seeds that kind of I had within me, and they're just starting to have this awakening. And it was like really empowering to see, people my age, people younger than me, who are already having, this revelation that like, oh, something's amiss here, and it needs to be addressed. Yeah. So I want to help men get unbound, because like there's we're just from a patriarchal stand, like we have fucked up the world in so many ways, and especially our daughters and our wives and our sisters and mothers, and we're doing it out of this just subconscious entitlement that's been beat down into us, that we're so damn important, and we're just really not. We're all important,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my headline is like, we're all robbed by the patriarchy,
Yeah,
men, women, children. Like it robs all of us of our humanity, that systemic violence. So yeah, thank you for being one of those men who are like, you're doing the work and you're helping others do the work and continuing to like also be in the trenches, right? I just want to hold, I trust someone who's like in the foxhole with me way
Mm.
more than someone who's like, I've arrived, I'm levitating under the Bodhi
right.
tree. Like, mm,
Mm.
no, not as long as you're in this spacesuit. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you. Shall we pivot, Heidi?
Let
Do you have a
us
question?
pivot. So the chat pack question is, you have your own late night talk show. Who do you invite as your first guest?
Do they have to be alive?
No?
Okay. Alan Watts. Yeah, I would love to have a conversation with Alan Watts.
I am inviting my grandmother, Vivian Ferguson, whom I have never met. I want to meet her and I want to talk to her. I feel like she, from what I've understood, she was a woman ahead of her time.
Mm.
Mm. Oh my gosh. This is just on top of mind for you two. I'm running through like a Rolodex right now. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Well, I'll say this. It's like my biological mother. My father and her divorced when I was 2 years old. Um, she and her behaviors, in addition to my father's in the marriage, created a lot of my anxious attachment. And haven't seen her since I was 12. She passed away from COVID a year and a half ago. My brother and I went back to North Dakota to meet our kin, our relatives, and that was a huge part of kind of connecting the dots. But I would love to have a conversation with her and hear it from her personally, like what it was like, one, to be married to my father, because I know what it's like to be his son. But also like just to be able to validate her pain, her drug addiction, and all the things that somebody in the late 60s must have felt, at 18 years old getting married.
Yeah.
And just having a reconciliation and letting her know, like, I'm good.
Yeah.
And I'm going to carry on the torch,
Wow. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Fereshta. So this was Fierce Honest Hearts. If you care to subscribe, we would appreciate that. Send us a like, give us a shout out, share with your friends if you want. If you don't, that's okay too. And until next time, ciao.